My son's lawyer called me on a Tuesday morning, and the first thing he said wasn't hello. "Mr. Callahan, I need you to come to my office today. Alone. Don't tell your daughter-in-law." I remember standing in my kitchen in Oakville, still holding my coffee mug, the steam curling up toward the ceiling. I was 63 years old. I had buried a wife, raised a son, and spent 31 years as a civil engineer before retirement. I thought the hardest things in my life were already behind me. I was wrong. I should back up. My wife, Patricia, passed away 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by September. 34 years of marriage, and then one morning I was folding her side of the bed because there was no reason not to. My son Daniel was 28 at the time. He handled it the way young men handle grief, by throwing himself into work, into routines, into anything that kept him moving forward. 2 years after Patricia passed, Daniel met Renee at a charity gala in downtown Toronto. She was 31, originally from Vancouver, worked in pharmaceutical sales. Polished, articulate, the kind of woman who remembers the names of waitstaff and asks follow-up questions about your hobbies like she's genuinely interested. I liked her, in the beginning. They dated for 14 months and got engaged on a Thursday evening at Niagara-on-the-Lake. Daniel called me that night from the restaurant, voice cracking, telling me he wished his mother could have been there. I told him she was. I believed it. They married the following May in a small ceremony outside Burlington. 60 guests, white tent, Patricia's favorite flowers, white peonies, because Daniel had thought to ask me. I cried twice, and neither time was I ashamed. For the first year of their marriage, everything seemed right. Daniel worked in commercial real estate. Renee kept her sales position. They bought a townhouse in Mississauga. I visited on Sundays, sometimes stayed for dinner. Renee made a good lamb chop. She always had the right wine. It was during the second year that I started noticing small things. Not dramatic things, not the kind of things you could point to and say, "Here, this is wrong." Just small shifts. The way Renee would glance at her phone when she thought no one was watching. The way she sometimes tensed when Daniel mentioned old university friends, particularly one named Marcus, who worked in finance and had been Daniel's roommate for 3 years before Daniel met Renee. I noticed that Marcus had stopped coming around. When I asked Daniel casually about it one Sunday, whether he and Marcus still grabbed a beer now and then, Daniel shrugged and said Renee found Marcus a bit much, that he was loud, that she preferred quieter evenings. I stored that away without knowing why. The bigger thing happened about 18 months into their marriage, when Renee announced she was pregnant. Daniel was overjoyed. He called me from the hospital parking lot, voice pure sunshine, telling me I was going to be a grandfather. I sat down on my back porch and looked out at the lake. I live on a property in Oakville with a small dock. Nothing grand, but Patricia always loved the water, and I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But somewhere beneath the hope, something else was sitting quietly. I couldn't name it then. I can name it now. Dread. The pregnancy moved forward normally, as far as I could see. Renee seemed healthy. Daniel was attentive, maybe overly so, in the way new fathers become when they're terrified of doing anything wrong. I came to appointments when I was invited. I helped them convert the spare room into a nursery. I assembled a crib from IKEA and swore only twice. It was at the 20-week ultrasound that the appointment happened. Daniel had texted me that morning Renee's parents were in Vancouver and couldn't make it, and he wanted family present. I drove to the clinic in Mississauga, a place called Trillium Women's Health, sat in the waiting room with Daniel, both of us nervous in the pleasant way expectant families are nervous, flipping through magazines. Neither of us was reading. Renee was in the room first. Daniel was called in a few minutes later. I waited outside. About 20 minutes passed. Then the door opened and a man in his late 40s came out, the ultrasound technician. I assumed, though he moved with a kind of controlled urgency that didn't fit the setting. He looked at me. "Are you the patient's father-in-law?" I said I was. He said, quietly, "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" We walked to the end of the hallway. He introduced himself as David Mercer, a senior sonographer. He lowered his voice. "Mr. Callahan, I'm going to be stepping outside my professional lane here, and I want you to know that." He paused. "I've been doing this work for 19 years, and I've seen certain patterns before. I can't tell you what I saw on that screen today. Patient confidentiality doesn't permit that. But I can tell you that your son deserves to have someone in his corner who is paying close attention. Very close attention." He handed me a card. The name on the back is a family lawyer I trust. Not for anything dramatic. Just in case your son ever needs someone to talk to. He walked back down the hall. I stood there holding the card, the fluorescent lights humming above me. I slipped it into my jacket pocket before Daniel came out. On the drive back, Daniel was quieter than usual. Renee sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone. When I asked how everything looked, Daniel said fine, good, everything was normal. He smiled, but it was the smile of a man who has been told to smile. I went home and looked at the card. The name on the back was Thomas Weir, Family Law. I recognized the firm. They had an office on Lakeshore in Burlington. I had driven past it many times. I did not call right away. I spent 3 days arguing with myself. I was 63 years old. I was a retired engineer from Oakville. I had no business involving myself in my son's marriage based on a cryptic hallway conversation with a sonographer who had gone outside his professional lane, as he himself admitted. But I kept thinking about Marcus. I called Thomas Weir on the 4th day. He answered himself, which surprised me. I explained who I was, that I'd received his card from David Mercer. There was a pause on the line. David called me, he said. I was expecting to hear from you. He asked me to come in, not as a client. He said just to talk. I drove to Burlington that Thursday afternoon. His office was modest, 2nd floor above a pharmacy, the kind of space that suggests a man who has been doing good work for a long time without needing to advertise it. He closed the door and sat across from me. I can't share information from other cases, he said first. That's not what this is. What I can tell you is that David Mercer has referred 2 other men to me in the past 4 years. Both were situations in which a pregnancy was not what it appeared to be. Both involved significant financial implications that the husband was not aware of. I asked him what he meant by that. He leaned forward. Before I say more, does your daughter-in-law have access to your son's assets? His accounts, his real estate, any inheritance structures that involve your grandchild automatically? The question sat on the table between us like something cold. I told him I didn't know the details of their financial arrangements. But I knew that 6 months before the pregnancy was announced, Daniel had updated his will. He had told me over dinner, casually, that Renee had suggested it made sense now that they were building a life together. He'd added her as primary beneficiary and added a provision that any biological child would receive the family property in Oakville if something happened to both of them before the child turned 30. The Oakville property had been in our family for 22 years. Patricia had picked it. It was worth, in today's market, somewhere between $1.4 and $1.7 million. Thomas Weir wrote something down. Mr. Callahan, he said, I'd like to suggest, gently, that your son consider a paternity test. I drove home in silence. I want to be honest about the days that followed because I think honesty matters in a story like this. I did not sleep well. I second-guessed everything. I told myself I was a grieving widower who had never fully accepted his son's marriage, projecting suspicion onto an innocent woman because she wasn't Patricia. I told myself I was being the worst kind of meddling parent. I told myself David Mercer was a strange man who had no right to involve himself in a stranger's family. Then I thought about the way Renee tensed at the mention of Marcus. I thought about the Sunday 3 months earlier when Daniel had been called into work unexpectedly and I had arrived at their townhouse to find Renee's car gone. When I mentioned it to Daniel later casually, asking if she'd been running errands, he said she'd been home all day with a headache. I thought about the insurance policy. 6 weeks before the pregnancy announcement, Daniel had received a call from a financial advisor, someone Renee had referred him to, a colleague of a colleague recommending a significant increase to his life insurance coverage. Daniel had mentioned it to me, half joking, saying Renee was becoming very responsible in her old age. The policy had been raised to $1.2 million. I thought about all of it, laid end to end like dominoes, and I made a decision. I called Daniel and asked if he wanted to grab lunch, just the 2 of us. We went to a diner near his office in Mississauga, a place we'd gone together since he was a teenager. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. So did I. When the food came, I set down my fork, and I told him that I loved him more than anything remaining in my life, and that because of that love, I needed to ask him something difficult. I told him about David Mercer, about Thomas Weir, about all of it. I watched my son's face while I talked. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move much. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long time, looking down at his plate. Then he said, Dad, Marcus called me 2 months ago. He said he needed to tell me something about Renee. I didn't take the call. She was standing right there. We sat in that diner for 2 more hours. Daniel contacted Thomas Weir the following week. Weir guided him through the process carefully, a prenatal paternity test, non-invasive, conducted through a private laboratory. Daniel gave a sample. Through a separate process I won't detail here, a sample was also obtained from Marcus. He agreed immediately when Daniel reached out, and the fact that he agreed without hesitation told its own story. We waited 11 days for the results. I spent those 11 days doing normal things. I tended to my doc. I watched the hockey game. I called my sister in Halifax twice about nothing in particular. I did not tell anyone what was happening. I kept my voice steady when I spoke to Renee at Sunday dinner, and I watched her pour Daniel more wine with the attentiveness of a woman who needed things to proceed smoothly, and I kept my face still. The results came on a Friday morning. Daniel called me from his car. He had pulled over somewhere, I don't know where. His voice was the voice of a person standing in rubble. The child was not his. I drove to him. We sat in a Tim Hortons parking lot in Mississauga for 2 hours, and I let him talk and cry, and go quiet and talk again. He is my son. He was 10 years old when he broke his arm falling from the oak tree in our backyard, and he cried then exactly the same way, not for the pain, but for the shock that the world had allowed it to happen. Thomas Weir connected Daniel with a private investigator named Carol Stauffer, based in Hamilton. She was thorough and efficient, and within 3 weeks had documented evidence of an ongoing relationship between Renee and Marcus going back at least 14 months, well before the pregnancy. But what Carol found beyond the affair was something we had not expected. Marcus had a common-law partner of 4 years, a woman named Diane, with 2 children. He had no intention of leaving her. More importantly, financial records obtained through legal channels showed that Renee had, over the previous 8 months, made a series of transfers from a joint savings account she held with Daniel, small amounts, never more than $2,800 at a time, always on weekdays when Daniel was in back-to-back client meetings. The total, accumulated, was just over $34,000. It had been moved to a personal account in Renee's name alone, opened 6 weeks before the pregnancy announcement. When Daniel's lawyer contacted Renee's lawyer, things moved quickly and badly for her. The transfers were fraudulent under the terms of their joint account agreement. The paternity results meant Daniel had legal grounds to challenge the will amendment. The updated beneficiary designation on the life insurance policy was reviewed and contested. Renee's lawyer asked for time. Time was not something Daniel was feeling generous about. The divorce filing happened on a gray Wednesday in October. I drove Daniel to the lawyer's office and waited in the lobby with a bad coffee and a magazine I didn't read. When he came out, he looked exhausted in the way that is different from sadness, the exhaustion of someone who has finished carrying something very heavy and is not yet sure what to do with their empty hands. Renee moved back to Vancouver before the first snow. Her parents collected her things in a rented van over a weekend when Daniel was at my place. He spent that weekend repainting the spare room, the nursery we had built together, back to the original gray. I helped. We didn't talk much. We listened to the radio. The child was born in January. A boy. Renee named him something I won't repeat here because it is not my name to share. Daniel was granted a full legal acknowledgement that he carried no parental responsibility, financial or otherwise. The process was not easy. It was not clean, but it was done. Marcus, from what I understand, learned about the child in a call from Renee's lawyer. The fallout in his personal life is not something I have details about, nor do I particularly want them. I am not going to tell you that my son recovered quickly, because that would not be true. He took 4 months away from work. He moved back into his townhouse in late spring, and we established a new routine, Tuesday dinners, alternating between his place and mine. He started running again, which he had stopped doing somewhere in the middle of the marriage without either of us noticing. But I want to tell you about a specific evening in July. We were sitting on my dock, the 2 of us, watching the water go dark as the sun dropped behind the tree line. Daniel had a beer. I had tea because my doctor is relentless, and apparently so is she. We hadn't talked about Renee in 6 weeks. By mutual unspoken agreement, he said, out of nowhere, I keep thinking about Mom. I asked what specifically. He said, I keep thinking she would have seen it. Way before any of us did, she always saw people clearly. I never understood how she did that. I thought about Patricia for a moment, about the particular kind of attention she paid to people, the way she listened not just to what was said but to the edges around it. She would have figured it out, I agreed. Probably at the first dinner. Daniel laughed. It was a real laugh, not a performance of one. I should have introduced them earlier, he said, meaning introduced Renee to Patricia's memory, to her photographs, to the stories, to who she was. I kept them separate in my head, like I was protecting something. I didn't say anything to that, because I didn't need to. There is something I want to say to anyone listening who is in the middle of something like this, not at the end of it, as I am now, But in the middle, where it is murky and you're questioning your own motives and you don't know if what you're seeing is real or just grief wearing the shape of suspicion, trust the thing in your stomach that doesn't go away. Not because it is always right, it is not always right. But when something true is sitting there quietly, not making noise, just remaining, that persistence means something. My instinct wasn't rage. It wasn't jealousy on Daniel's behalf. It was a quiet, stubborn refusal to look away from what I was seeing. David Mercer stepped outside his professional lane and handed me a card in a hospital hallway. He did that because he had seen the pattern before, and he had learned that silence is its own kind of complicity. I think about that. I think about what would have happened if he had kept walking. If I had talked myself out of calling Thomas Weir. If Daniel had kept not taking Marcus's calls. I will not pretend there was a clean resolution where everyone healed and the property was safe, and Daniel found love again, and all was made right. Life is not structured that way, and I am 63 years old and I know this. But Daniel is okay. He is genuinely, actually okay, not performing it, not managing it, but living it. He calls me on Tuesdays before dinner to ask if I need anything from the grocery store, which is his way of saying he is thinking about me, which is his way of saying everything is fine. The dock needs repainting this spring. He has already offered to help. That to me is the whole story. Not the lawyers, not the paternity test, not the $34,000. The dock and the Tuesday calls and the sound of my son's real laugh in the July evening light. That is what we were protecting. That is what remains.